Welcome back to part 4 of our ECU tuning journey, and this time we're going to talk about base maps, or rather we are going to talk about the AFR base map, because in addition to the settings you have another few tables that you have to adjust first before you can start your car. In theory, on a base map they should be pretty solid for a startup, but there are some things to optimize. And on turbo car, they might not be so great for what you are going to see on a base map. So we will go over that. Again, as every time, if you have any questions, let us know down below. If you like the content, always give us a like or subscribe to the channel for future parts. And if you have any questions regarding your build or need any tuning done, we offer those services too. Just hit us up or hit me up on Instagram. I will reply to you as soon as possible with hopefully some help. So yeah, and enjoy the video. Today we're just going to talk about AFR tables. Okay, the next thing, or rather the first thing or table we are going to look at is the AFR table. For that we're going under tuning and then AFR target table. You could also do that with a lambda target table, which would be the lambda values, but I prefer using AFR values because yeah, I've just learned it that way. If you have other preferences, you obviously could use lambda as well. This is going to convert automatically to lambda, so when you change something to like 10 here, then it's going to be automatically changed in the lambda table here as well. So you don't have to edit both to the same thing. It is going to be the same here as it is here. See, if I change this, for example, to lambda 0.8, then you have 11.8 AFR here. But I'm going to 13, I'm going to put it back down to the standard values I just did, and there you go. So as you can see here from the last cut, I have now upgraded my Tunerstudio version, or rather I have just activated it, and I'm going to go into the AFR target table again, and now we have the option to scale the columns automatically, or rather put in our scaling and then it will interpolate. So we have our road down below here, and then we obviously have to put in the numbers on the top and the side as well ourselves, but it is going to interpolate the values automatically. So if I put in 7500 here, which would be the maximum RPM, I would recommend going about 200 RPM higher than your maximum RPM is, because just for the reason that it might spike over that somewhat, although it is going to use the last column of values for the higher RPMs, but still I would recommend doing about 200 RPMs higher. So we're going to use 7700 here, and then you could just pull that down, so 6500, and yeah, that's pretty much it. And if we click interpolate, it will interpolate these values. Obviously it's not going to do much because they are very similar, but still it changed these values that are in red. Red means it changed it to leaner, and blue means it changed it to richer, and it changed only those few values here. And then we can click close, then that window closes again, click on burn, then those values are applied. You see we have our new values here. I'm also going to do the same with the fuel load KPA. As an example, I would go and use a turbocharged engine where we will run, for example, 14 psi. That's just an example, and it depends on how much power you want to run. 14 psi or 15 psi is 1 bar or 200 kPa. So if 100 kPa is atmospheric, then 200 kPa would be 1 bar above that. I'm just going to use this one as 100 kPa, and then everything above that, above 100 kPa. I would also, as same with the RPM, recommend that you put in a number above the pressure you want to run at, For example, if you want to run at 200 kPa, I would recommend 220 to 230 kPa, depending on where your overboost protection is set at. That is probably the maximum you should put in there as well. You could obviously do more, so for example 250, if you plan on running more boost in the future, then you can put in 250 there. Another thing I like to do is go one step below that, below the last one, and go only 10 kPa below that, because we're going to do something that is pretty much a safety that you can implement, because the Speeduino ECU does not have much as for safety, so we are going to do our own safety basically. You could, as I said, leave 10 or 20 kPa between those, and we're just going to do the normal value we are aiming at right here, and then we are going to aim for much richer on the top row, so that when the engine experiences overboost, it is just going to inject more fuel to either cool down the engine if it has too much boost, and then will automatically make the burning process cooler and prevent knock in a case where the engine experiences higher boost levels. And then we will just interpolate down again, I will say like 180 kPa, 140, and then 130 kPa, 160, 190, and then we have basically it. And we don't need that much different columns. You could obviously do more if you wanted to go down further. You could use this one as 100 kPa if you, for example, running more boost. But for this setup, for one bar, this would be probably enough. And then we obviously have to interpolate that downward as well. So we are going to use 85, 70, let's do 60, 45, yeah, and that's basically fine. We will see if we even need the 26 and 16, because I think we are going to top out at around 20 to 25 kPa when running the engine with stock cams. Depending on how your engine is set up, if you have really aggressive cams, your engine might only run at like a vacuum of 0.5 bar or 50 kPa, so it would run at around here. And when, for example, on deceleration, so when you are going off throttle, so when you are in gear going off throttle, then you can see how much it's going down, and depending on how low the kPa value drops, this will be your last column right here, and you can shift that downwards. So we probably will not be needing the 16 kPa, but maybe the 26. So we could basically shift this down another row. I'm just going to leave this here because it doesn't really hurt anything, and we still have the precision that we need. Then we're also going to click apply new XY values here. And then we are applying this, but you obviously got to keep in mind that we don't have anything changed for boost applications anyway, so this does not really matter for us. So yeah, and again click burn. So now comes the interesting part where we change the table. First of all, we also have something which is pretty interesting, and I like to show you is the 3D view, which probably many of you know from films like Fast and Furious. And there you can see a 3D table. This doesn't really make sense for tuning purposes, but it makes sense for showing you how smooth the whole table is, because the smoother the table, the smoother also your engine is going to behave. So it's not going to stutter or anything when the tables are pretty smooth, and then you probably don't have any problems with your tables itself, but rather with the engine in general getting not enough fuel or having some other issues. At least if the lambda values or the AFR values are correct. Now we're going to look at the table itself. There are different categories in a table, or rather different positions where the engine is running at. For example, if we were running in idle, we would be running somewhere in this field. So between 16 and 40 or 50 kPa, and between 500 and 1500 RPM, depending on how warm the engine is. And if it's running colder, it obviously has a bit of a higher RPM if it is programmed that way. And we want to be running at AFR 14.7 in that scenario, which is idle, because an emissions control or emissions testing is also going to be done at that, and then you have to achieve an AFR of 14.7, which is lambda 1 and the optimal burning of the fuel air mixture or air fuel mixture. And so that is the thing you want to aim for. Above that, we are going in part throttle, so basically everything from here to here is part throttle. So when cruising on a highway or whatever you're doing, just normal driving around in the city, not really full throttle or whatever, then it's going to be here. And we are just going to put that at like AFR 15, because that can be a bit leaner, maybe just even 15.3. Maybe gonna save a bit of fuel. And then what we are also gonna do, which is not possible with the free version, because that's also a thing I recommend why you should buy the full version, is we're gonna mark those cells and click the interpolate button, and then it's gonna interpolate those values, and we are going to have smooth out that whole area. Obviously this is so okay. My mistake. I told you before that red is leaner and blue is richer, but actually blue is number higher, so leaner, and red is richer, but this is only in the AFR table, and the VE table it's the other way around. So yeah, because higher AFR values, so 16 is much leaner than, for example, 14 or 13. And this is basically what we are aiming for. On part throttle or on part load, we are aiming for a leaner mixture, so that we are burning the air fuel mixture leaner. We could even go a bit leaner here, but we don't necessarily have to. You can see here, this is relatively relatively smooth. It just looks a bit weird because obviously we have a lot of boost cells here that we haven't touched yet, but this looks relatively smooth. And obviously you could also put in 14.7 here, but at 15.3 or somewhere between 15 and 16, the engine, as long as it doesn't stutter or anything, is going to be running a bit more efficient, or rather a bit more fuel saving. So that might be something you want to aim at, but it's not going to be a massive difference, only like 0.2, 0.3 liters. Okay, so now we are going to look at the full throttle, or rather the not full load, but on the higher load axis, which would be kind of this, for example. This would be in boost, so above 100 kPa would be in boost, and below 100 kPa would be not in boost yet. If your turbo, depending on how your turbo is set up, if it is a good spooling turbo or a not so good spooling turbo, obviously the RPM where you are going to be in boost is going to vary depending on how, as I said, how big your turbo is. But the settings I put in here are going to be the same nevertheless. At 100 kPa we are going to be looking at somewhere between 12.5 and 13 AFR. This is fine. This is also perfect for an NA application, although there it is a bit more difficult because some NA cars want a bit leaner mixture and some want a bit more fuel. That also depends, and you might only find out what is perfect for your car at the dyno. On a turbocharged car, it is pretty much, there is a rule of thumb that you can go off of, and you can say that 13 AFR is okay for part throttle at 100 kPa. As soon as you tip into boost, you want to lower that though to about 12.5, so that the car does run a bit richer, and even to 12.2 right here. So the higher the RPM, the richer it gets. And then the higher the boost is, the higher or the richer the mixture has to go. I'm going to aim for about 11.8 at our full boost level, with 11.5 at 220 kPa, and then 10.5 at our overboost. And then I'm going to use a bit leaner on the lower RPMs, because then the car is going to be running a bit better there. But this is not going to make a huge difference. Okay, there you go. So we have our values for in boost now, and as I said, depending on your boost values that you are aiming for, your full throttle is going to be this line, which we are aiming for 11.8 AFR or thereabouts. You could, depending on your engine setup, if your engine is a stock turbocharged engine, you could also be running a leaner, like 12.1 or 12.2 AFR. But I would recommend that you stick to somewhere between 11.5 and 11.8 AFR to just be on the safe side, especially when you are using an engine that has not been previously turbocharged, such as a Miata engine, for example. Then we're just going to smooth out this back here as well, and then we are basically done. This is your base AFR table. Obviously, things can vary if you running more boost, so then you could just extend this further up, and the same things would basically apply. As I said, you do not have to do this like the top row, but for my experience, this is just a safety to make the car run richer when you are running too much boost. When something fails on your engine, for example a wastegate line pops off or whatever, and before going into fuel cut, the car just runs richer than it has to. And yeah, this is especially important for running stock pistons, because they don't like high heat loads, because they are only good for longevity and not for really turbocharged applications if they have been in a NA car before. We could also, in the part throttle where we have the AFR values of 100 kPa, we could also go a bit leaner and a bit richer on this side. If you want to, it does not make much of a difference when not running boost, but you could obviously do it. And we'll just smooth out a bit so that we are running, as I said, that our table is smooth. And see, our table is relatively smooth. Obviously we have that peak here because we are running pretty lean on part throttle, but that isn't really that bad, but the rest is relatively smooth. We have kind of a low spot here, so we can look at that, and this would be, yeah, this is kind of only right here, so we could smooth that out a bit. And there we go, because you're not going to run boost at like 1500 RPM, and there you have it. We don't have that bad of a table anymore. Obviously you are never going to run within this column, so those numbers are pretty much, they don't really matter for tuning anyways, because you are not going to run boost anywhere between 500 and 1500 RPM, even if you have a relatively small turbocharger. Boost is probably going to come in at around 2000 at the earliest point, and even then it's not going to be much probably. But as I said, this just has to be smooth as any other table, and that makes the car drive much better than a jagged table that has peaks and whatever and cliffs in it. That just doesn't work. And this is pretty much everything for the AFR-Table. There is some things to note as well. Obviously, if you do not have emissions testing in your country or where you are tuning, you could also make the idle a bit richer, so like 13.5 to 14. Then you may have a bit more stable idle, especially when cold starting or when not having an ideal tune yet. And it does not impact fuel consumption that much. And that would be a possibility to make the car run a bit better, but that's also something I guess you have to look into yourself if you want to do that or if you don't want to do that. As I said, 14.7 would be the ideal scenario where you will pass emissions, and depending on what your emissions tests are, you may also have to run 14.7 up to the point of 3000 RPM or so, but that's something you have to look into yourself and depending on where you have to do the testing. And yeah, as I said, that's it for AFR tables for setting up the base map. That is getting you into a ballpark, although the AFR map is going to not only get you into a ballpark, but it is basically a finished table, because that's just a target where we want to end up when tuning the VE table later, not only manually but also with auto tune or with log files. So it is going to look at, the ECU is going to look at the AFR table and then look at the AFR the car achieved while driving, and then calculate how much it needs in terms of the VE table to get to the correct AFR table. So the AFR table needs to be correct to use automatic tuning features and to get the correct calculations. That's it for this video. I wish you a nice day as always, and goodbye.